As the first light of morning gently touched the high carved walls of the palace, Neferu stirred beneath her soft linen sheets, her eyes slowly blinking open to the soft golden glow dancing across the ceiling, where the painted wings of goddess Isis stretched like a silent embrace. And the scent of fresh lotus flowers drifted in through the open window, carried on a breeze that felt like a whisper from the Nile itself, cool and kind. She stayed still for a moment, letting the calm morning fill her heart before sitting up, her small hands resting on the smooth stone of her bed frame as she looked around her chamber, the golden room, as everyone called it, not for its wealth, but for the way the sunlight seemed to love it most, brushing gently against every surface, from the soft blue curtain that fluttered like a sigh to the polished floor where her little sandals waited. Nearby, Hema, her quiet and cheerful handmaiden, appeared with a soft smile, carrying a silver bowl of rosewater and a linen cloth, and together they began the morning in peaceful silence, Neferu letting Hema braid her hair slowly, gently, like weaving the thoughts of the day into something calm and beautiful. And as they worked, they talked not about palaces or duties, but about dreams. And Hema told her about a little bird she had seen building a nest near the kitchen garden, and Neferu listened with such warmth that Hema felt like they were just two girls. Not princess and servant, but simply two hearts, watching the world together. When the golden anklets were placed softly on her feet, Neferu stood, her light robe fluttering around her as she stepped toward the open balcony, the view stretching out to the far desert where the land glowed like honey and the sky seemed endless. And though she had seen this view every morning of her life, today it felt different. Today she was to attend her first official temple ritual as the daughter of Pharaoh, and a quiet mix of pride and fear stirred gently in her chest like the ripples of a boat floating down the Nile. Her tutor had explained the ceremony many times, but it wasn't the rules or the words. She remembered it was the look in the priestess's eyes when she said, "It is not about being seen, dear child, it is about being still," and had nodded then, not fully understanding, but now, as she stood with the warm morning wind brushing her face, she felt something beginning inside her, something small and soft, like the start of a new breath. After breakfast beneath the painted canopy, where papyrus stalks and blue birds looked down from the ceiling, she walked slowly down the long hallway of her ancestors, her footsteps echoing gently beneath murals of queens and kings who watched her silently from the walls, and though their faces were calm, she wondered if they, too, had ever felt the weight of being royal in their hearts. Outside the temple gates, the air was quiet, sacred, and even the breeze seemed to hush as the guards opened the great doors, carved with symbols of Mat and Ra. And Neferu stepped forward, her hands gently pressed together, her eyes wide with wonder, and her heart beating in a soft, steady rhythm, not fast, not slow, but just enough to remind her she was alive and learning and becoming something more. As the temple doors closed gently behind her, sealing out the world and drawing her into the deep, cool halls of stone and shadow, Neferu's breath slowed as she took her first true steps into the ancient quiet, where every whisper felt like a memory and every echo a question waiting to be heard. She did not know what would happen next, but she felt ready to listen, and her story, like the sunlight behind her, was just beginning to unfold. As the heavy doors of the temple closed softly behind her, Neferu felt the coolness of the sacred halls wrap around her like a quiet river, and the world outside, the sun, the sky, the palace seemed to fall away into a hush where only her footsteps and the distant sound of water could be heard, slow and soothing. The stone beneath her feet was smooth and cool, worn down by centuries of barefoot pilgrims who had walked this same path, and golden torches along the walls flickered, gently casting long shadows of ancient gods carved into the pillars. Anubis, Thoth Matal, watching in stillness, as if waiting for her to listen. A soft voice called her name, and from the shadows appeared an elder priestess wrapped in white linen, her face lined with the wisdom of many years, but softened by the kindest eyes Neferu had ever seen. And without a word she reached out her hand, guiding Neferu deeper into the temple. Through narrow corridors and chambers, filled with the soft scent of frankincense and lotus, they stopped in a round room, its ceiling painted like the night sky with stars that shimmered even in the dim light. And in the center was a shallow pool of water, so still it looked like glass, and the priestess whispered, "This is where your true voice begins," before gently placing a drop of golden oil on Neferu's hands and her forehead. And as the scent filled her senses, something inside her quiet and not silenced by fear, but stilled by peace, like a harp string being softly touched. She was told to sit by the water, to close her eyes, and to listen not for voices outside, but for the echoes within. And as she breathed slowly, the silence began to bloom with quiet memories, her mother's laughter, the whisper of Hema stories, the voice of the old gardener saying stars remember everything, and tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the softness of being seen without speaking. Time seemed to vanish in that room, and when she opened her eyes again, the priestess was beside her, smiling gently, and said, "You are not here to become something new, dear one. You are here to remember who you already are." And Neferu, without quite understanding it, felt those words settle deep in her chest, like a warm feather drifting down. As she left the room, they passed through a hallway, filled with low whispers, not voices, but wind moving through the ancient stones, and the priestess explained, "The temple remembers everything, even things the world forgets," and Neferu found comfort in knowing that her quiet thoughts had a home here, even if they were never spoken aloud. They returned to the upper chambers, where sunlight gently filtered through a narrow opening in the ceiling, and there, in a quiet garden tucked within the temple walls, Neferu saw a familiar figure, the old gardener from the palace, carefully tending 2 small pots of blue lilies and papyrus. And when he saw her, he smiled with surprise and joy, saying, "Even the desert finds a way to bloom, little star." And they sat together on a stone bench, sharing soft words about things that truly mattered, like kindness and balance, and the way even silence can carry love. The priestess brought her a scroll, blank and clean, and said it was hers to begin whenever her heart was ready. And though Neferu held it carefully, she did not rush to write. She only closed her eyes and breathed, letting the quiet temple fill her one last time before she stepped back into the corridor, her sandals whispering softly with each step. And as the golden door opened again to the world outside, the afternoon sun wrapped her in warmth, and she knew she was not the same as when she had entered, not changed by force, but by softness, like stone shaped slowly by water. And as she returned to the palace with Hema walking quietly beside her, she looked back at the temple with gratitude, carrying the silence in her heart like a sacred gift, knowing the next part of her journey was waiting, where a mask and a mirror would show her something she was only just beginning to understand. That evening, as the soft glow of sunset bathed the palace walls in a golden pink light, Neferu stood quietly before her dressing table, watching as the royal attendants gently lifted the ceremonial mask of mat from its velvet cloth, the gold and turquoise shining with delicate beauty under the oil lamps. And though it had been prepared for her many times before, tonight was the first time she would wear it before the full moon court. And as she reached out to touch its polished surface, a strange feeling rose in her chest, like a bird with slow wings fluttering softly inside her. The mask was beautiful, yes, with its carefully carved lines and symbols of balance and justice. But it felt heavy even before she placed it on her face, not just in weight, but in what it meant. And she found herself pausing, her fingers resting gently on its edge, as she caught her own reflection in the smooth copper mirror nearby her young face, curious and unsure, framed by braids and soft linen. Looking back at her with wide, thoughtful eyes that held questions too quiet to say aloud, Hema stepped in then, adjusting the folds of Neferu's robe with gentle hands. And when she saw the princess still staring at her reflection, she said softly, "Sometimes we wear things outside to understand what we feel inside." And Neferu nodded, not with certainty, but with trust in the words. The grand celebration began soon after, with music and slow drums echoing through the courtyards, and as Neferu stepped into the moonlight, wearing the mask, a hush fell over the court, and people bowed low not to her, but to what the mask represented, and she walked slowly between the pillars of lotus and flame. Her footsteps light, but her heart heavy, feeling like a painting come to life, graceful and still, yet hidden beneath gold. The high priest blessed her in soft tones, and the voices of the temple singers rose like wind through reeds. Yet Neferu felt distant, as if the sound came from far away, and when her part in the ceremony was finished, she quietly slipped away from the lantern-lit hall and made her way down the long corridor that led to the old library, a place where her mother used to read when she was alive, and where few people came at night. Inside, the room was still, filled with the soft scent of scrolls and cedar wood, and she removed the mask, placing it gently on the table beside her, then turned to the old bronze mirror once more, the same one that had been in the palace since her grandmother's time, and as she looked into it now, without the mask, she did not see royalty or ceremony. She saw a girl who wanted to be seen, not for the gold on her skin, but for the thoughts in her heart. She reached for the scroll the priestess had given her, still blank, and carefully wrote just one line. "I feel more like myself when I am quiet," and as the ink dried, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. Not joy exactly, but peace-like, finding a small light in the dark and knowing it belonged to you. A small noise came from the doorway, and Hema entered, holding a cup of warm honeyed milk and a folded piece of linen, and without speaking, she sat beside Neferu, placing the cup near her and handing her the cloth. It was a simple handkerchief, embroidered with a tiny lotus, and Neferu remembered it from years ago, a gift Hema had made with clumsy stitches when they were children, and they both smiled at the memory without needing to say a word. Outside, the music from the court faded into the distance as the moon rose higher, and in the stillness of the library, Neferu leaned back against the cool stone wall, sipping the milk slowly while Hema rested her head nearby, and in that moment, surrounded by scrolls and soft silence, she understood something she could not yet explain, that the mask had taught her what it meant to be seen, but the mirror had shown her the beauty of being real. The stars outside twinkled like gentle eyes in the night sky, and before she closed her own, she reached for her scroll once more and wrote a second line. Truth begins where the mask ends, and as sleep slowly pulled her into its soft embrace, the moonlight crept across the floor, touching the edge of the mirror and then the mask, and everything in the room felt at rest, waiting quietly for the next day, when the river would carry her closer to the part of herself that had always been there, soft, steady, and ready to give. The morning began with a golden mist drifting over the palace gardens, soft and warm like a memory still half asleep, and as Neferu stepped out from her chamber, wrapped in a light robe, and her hair tied simply with a faded linen ribbon, she felt something calling her, not in words, but in a quiet pull of the heart, like the way a breeze guides a drifting leaf hand. She turned to Hema, who stood nearby with a knowing smile, and said gently, "I want to see the Nile today." And without hesitation, Hema nodded and prepared a small bundle of fruit and water, and together they slipped away through the side gate, past the courtyard where lilies bloomed in sleepy silence, and out into the dusty path that led to the great river. They walked slowly, letting the stillness speak for them, their sandals brushing through the sand, and by the time they reached the riverbank, the sun had climbed just enough to make the water shimmer like glass sprinkled with gold dust, and the air was filled with the scent of wet earth and sweet reeds. And Neferu stood quietly, feeling the ancient rhythm of the Nile move through her, steady and strong and forever gentle, like the heartbeat of the land itself. As they sat beneath a shady fig tree, a young boy approached with shy eyes, carrying a small basket of dates, and Hema smiled at him and asked softly about his day. And he spoke of his sick sister who needed medicine, but they had no coin. And Nefru, moved by something deep and sudden, removed the golden bracelet from her wrist, an old heirloom that had once belonged to her mother, and placed it gently in the boy's hands, her eyes kind and warm, and said, "This will help her." And though the boy was too surprised to speak, the way his small hands trembled as he held the bracelet said more than words ever could. After he left, Nefara walked to the river's edge and knelt down, dipping her hands into the cool water, and as it slipped between her fingers, she saw a single white feather floating by, delicate and soft, spinning slowly like a thought drifting through time, and she reached out and caught it just before it passed, holding it close and watching how the sunlight lit its edges like quiet fire. And for a long moment, she simply breathed, her eyes following the endless current, thinking of the stories the river carried, of the people it had touched, of the lives it had seen, and she whispered softly, "May I learn to flow like you," as if the river could hear her heart. They stayed there until the shadows grew longer and the breeze cooled, and on their walk back, Nefru was quiet, but not in the way of sadness. She was full of something new, something gentle, like the feeling after a song ends and the silence still hums in the air. And when they returned to her room, she placed the feather beside her scroll and wrote slowly, "Today I gave without being asked, and I felt full, not empty." And then she lit a small lamp, not for light, but for memory, letting its soft flame flicker against the wall where the shadow of the feather danced like a tiny bird, free and peaceful. Hema brought her warm milk and tucked her in without a word, knowing that some days do not need to be spoken. And as Neferu closed her eyes beneath her light cotton blanket, she held the feather near her heart and smiled gently, feeling its softness. Remind her that strength does not have to be loud, that kindness is a form of royalty, and that the river of her own soul was beginning to flow in the right direction. And just before sleep took her hand, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I will speak not with power, but with peace," and in the calm quiet of that promise, the night settled around her like a cradle of stars, ready to carry her into the next part of her journey, toward the still throne that waited in silence. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a sky so quiet, it felt like the world was holding its breath. And as Neferu awoke to the sound of soft flutes playing in the garden below, she sat up slowly, feeling the calm weight of the day settle gently around her shoulders like a warm shawl. And for a moment she simply watched the golden light move across the floor, catching the edges of the feather she had placed on her table days ago, its whiteness still bright and soft, untouched by time. Hema entered silently, her eyes shining with quiet pride, and helped Neferu dress in a robe of light linen embroidered with silver threads shaped like river reeds and stars. And though her hair was braided with care and her hands were adorned with soft bangles, there was nothing heavy about her. Today no mask, no ceremony, only truth. And as they walked through the halls together, their footsteps echoing gently beneath the high ceilings, Neferu felt no fear, only a deep and steady stillness within, like the surface of a calm lake just before sunrise. The great hall was filled with whispers and candlelight, with elders and nobles and priests standing in a wide circle around a throne carved from smooth white stone, simple yet beautiful, with lotus blossoms at its base and an etching of the Nile flowing up its sides. And the moment Neferu stepped into the room, everyone turned, not with loud praise or grand gestures, but with soft bows and quiet eyes, as if they all knew this day was not about power, but presence. She walked slowly to the throne, her heart beating like a gentle drum, steady and soft, and as she reached it, she paused it to be dramatic, but to remember the mask and the mirror, the temple and the feather, the river and the silence, and all the small moments that had brought her here. And then she sat down, her spine straight, her hands resting lightly on her lap, and the room felt like it exhaled, as if the very walls had been waiting for her to take her place, not just as royalty, but as herself. The priestess stepped forward, her robes whispering along the floor, and placed a tiny statue of Mat Goddess of balance at Neferu's feet, then whispered a blessing in the old language. Words Neferu did not fully understand, but felt. Deep in her chest, like music she had always known, and a hush filled the space as the wind outside gently stirred the curtains, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the Nile. In that stillness, Neferu closed her eyes, not to hide, but to listen. And in the quiet, she heard it, not a voice, but a feeling, a deep, peaceful sense of being in the right place, at the right time, with the right heart. And when she opened her eyes again, she smiled, not because she had become something more, but because she had finally become exactly herself. The court watched as she stood once more and stepped forward, holding the feather close to her chest, and with a voice as soft as morning light, she spoke gently of balance, kindness, and the quiet strength that lives in every heart. And though her words were simple, they fell over the room like rain on dry ground, sinking in slowly, lovingly, quietly. The ceremony ended not with shouts or trumpets, but with shared smiles and soft music. And as the crowd dispersed and the hall emptied, Neferu remained seated on the throne for a moment longer, watching the dust dance in the light, feeling the way the stillness wrapped around her like a blessing. And she whispered softly to herself, "I will be a queen not of rules, but of rhythm." And then she stood and walked out into the garden, where Himo waited with a fresh scroll and a cup of mint tea. And together they sat beneath the same fig tree where the journey had once begun. The same river whispering in the distance, the same stars slowly waking in the sky. And as Neferu unrolled the scroll and began to write, she smiled, knowing that, though this chapter had come to a peaceful end, a new one was already beginning in the quiet, gentle hush of the evening.